My name's Ken Willett, serve as the Division Manager for the Public Fire Protection Division at the National Fire Protection Association in Quincy, Mass. Joining me today is Russ Sanders, one of our regional directors, and Rick Swan, IAFF member, and also very active on our technical committees. Today we're going to spend some time talking to you about NFPA standards as they relate to the fire service. And I've taken the theme of standards in action because one of the challenges, standards are just a book. They're text on a page. That's not what really matters to you. What really matters to you, to your membership, to your family, is that the standards are put into use to provide for your safety, your wellness, and to ensure everybody goes home at the end of the tour. So I'd like to try and frame that today and give you a little information about NFPA. As an association, we've been developing standards since 1896. Currently, we have over 300 documents. Our focus is in the building, fire, and life safety standards, but we also have a strong library of fire and emergency service standards, and those are supported in my division. With me today is Ken Holland, and Dave Trebisacci. Dave. They are staff liaisons in the division. Ken supports the fire department occupational safety and health programs, NFPA 1500. He also supports our EMS programs, emergency medical services. Dave Trebisacci supports everything personal protective equipment, turnout gear, helmets, and the like. So they're here to answer any questions and to be a resource to you. We've gone digital. We now have a lot of apps and we have a lot of electronic files, but you also can get access to every NFPA document in a read-only format online for free. So that if you're doing work in your own department and you want to research a standard, you can go and view it for free, and it's www.nfpa.org/ the number of the document you wish to see. So if it's 1710, www.nfpa.org/1710 will take you and you'll be able to view it for free. These documents are here for you, and we'll try and talk about that today. A little bit about our process. Myself, Ken, Russ, Dave, we don't develop the standards. We have technical committees of about 30 volunteers, like Rick, who develop the standards, and we support that. We have 9 stakeholder groups for membership on each committee. No one stakeholder group can have more than 1/3 of the committee membership. That's so we can try and maintain balance. Our standards are constantly reviewed and updated on either a 3 or a 5-year revision cycle. We have a public process. We're open and transparent. We've just gone online so that if you want to participate by providing comment to a document, you can do that online at your leisure, and myself and Ken and Dave are here to assist you if you would like to know more about that. And we need your participation in the process. The Public Fire Protection Division, which is the fire and emergency responder standards, we currently have 93 active documents, 12 documents in the queue or under development. Our subject matter deals with equipment, personal protective equipment, operations and training, deployment, and professional qualifications. So what I'm going to do is use a video, and I'm going to talk through the video. So you can pay attention to the video, and I'll be making commentary about what's happening in the video to try and show you how NFPA standards are at work every day in firehouses across the country. Now remember, your workplace is not the fire station. Your workplace is the buildings you respond to, the motor vehicles you respond to, the wildlands you respond to, or the technical rescue incidents you respond to. Those are uncontrolled environments. So the one thing you have to depend on to guarantee your safety is having a robust set of standards, developing your protective equipment, your training, and your operational deployment. And I'll start the video. And the video takes about 8 minutes. And as it loads, this is a structure fire in Utica, New York. Anybody from New York? Anybody from Utica? Okay. And you'll notice that this is what we would call a bread and butter fire, if the video doesn't freeze up. So it's probably similar to fires that you all face in your own communities, and similar to fires that you've responded to many, many times. And fires that are within the resources, the capability, and the training of your department. But what's unique about this video is it's a great visual presentation of NFPA standards at work. I've heard the description that firefighting is a contact sport. Firefighting is not a partial activity, it's fully engaged. You're engaging your mind, your body, your apparatus, your company. It's full contact. In this video, we see Utica Fire arriving at a working fire in what seems to be an apartment building. Point of information, the door the smoke is coming out of is an apartment, and it is adjoined to the door on the right. There was a dividing wall that was 2 apartments. They took that wall down, and it's a single apartment. And you can see the Utica engine has arrived, and you've got a firefighter stretching the line. That firefighter is wearing NFPA compliant turnout gear. Our standards are at work protecting that firefighter as he makes entry. I'm sure many of you in the room have been in similar fire situations. In your mind, you know what he's going through. He's gotten down, he's put on his mask, he's put on his helmet and his gloves, he's done his check, he's stretching the line. He's got a backup firefighter coming to the left. The deputy chief has arrived, has assumed a position of command in front of the building. NFPA has a standard on incident management, 1521. You can notice the fire apparatus is parked in a position, and we saw the engineer, or the operator, he laid down the 5-inch supply line, and then he ran back to the hydrant, stretched it, made a connection, and came back to the engine. He was wearing his turnout gear when he did that, but he was following standard operating procedures. Interesting thing, fire apparatus standard 1901, there was a time when we were having a lot of firefighter fatalities due to ejections, due to rollovers. Standard 1901 changed over the years to require seatbelts, to require automatic traction controls and other safety devices. We have seen a tremendous reduction in the number of firefighter fatalities due to apparatus accidents. We had a large number due to tanker or tender incidents because there were no baffles required in the water tanks. 1901 changed to require baffles in water tanks. We've seen a dramatic reduction in the number of firefighter deaths due to tanker or tender rollovers. A few minutes ago, we saw as they made the line, and you can still see the police officer over on the far right. I think he's the only thing in this video that's not covered by an NFPA standard. We haven't gotten into law enforcement yet. You see him stretching ground ladders. That's standard 1932. It details the construction, the testing, and the annual in-service inspection for ground ladders. Interesting point. There was a period where firefighters were being seriously injured and in some case died after working off of ground ladders that collapsed while the firefighters were utilizing them. They were utilizing them properly, but the design of the ladders was insufficient for the weight of the firefighter and the activity taking place. Standard 1932 was updated and revised, introduced annual testing of ground ladders and inspection. The number of firefighter deaths from ground ladder failure since that has occurred has dropped to 0. NFPA standards at work, protecting you in your workplace. We can see the hose line is stretched, the 5-inch line along with the attack lines. Standard 1962, I believe, is the standard for hose testing. And you might do annual hose testing, and you wonder, oh, why do we do it? There have been cases where the hose lines have burst, and we've seen firefighters be injured by flying hose appliances, manifolds, or the hose. And one way to prevent that is by an annual testing and inspection program of your fire hose. We see a firefighter about to taking out a window. And notice the procedure he utilizes to take the window out. He's doing it for entry. You're going to see that he's going to remove the crossbar of the sill, and then he's going to enter through the apartment. Now, that's a reflection on that firefighter's training that was designed against NFPA 1001, which is the standard for basic firefighter training. On that note, every one of you in the room have been trained probably against that standard, and you might have gone the next stage, which is testing and certification. If you showed up on that scene, off duty, with turnout gear, and if you went over and you said to the chief, do you need help? And if he said yes, you would be able to operate on that fire ground in a pretty seamless manner because of your training. Even though it might have been on a distant part of the country, your training is done to the same standard if it complied with NFPA 1001. And you can see they're taking out. Now watch the fella on the ladder who just vented the window as he begins to climb down the ladder. He drops the axe. All right, that happens. So if you were exiting the apartment, what would have protected you? Your helmet. Your helmet is designed to NFPA 1971 and includes impact protection. Now, you know in the fire service, we love tradition and we love helmets. But the fact is, helmets of 10 and 15 years ago are not designed to the same standard of helmets today. And one of the big differences is impact protection. You might have had a headache, but you would have survived walking out of the building and having the axe drop on your head. So at this point, the fire seems to be under control. Two hose lines are advanced. We've got ventilation in progress. Crews are making entry. You can see the hand lights in the bottom left. So this seems to be pretty much a no-brainer. To the public, they say, they're protecting the property. They're going to do their job. To us, as I said, it's a bread and butter fire. It's what we do every day. And you might say, what's different about this fire? Why did I choose this fire? Well, let's just keep our eye, if you will, on the door to the left of the ladder, the first ladder. Just keep an eye on that for a few more minutes, if you would, please. We tend to think that a lot of our operations on fire, it's the most intense part, the hardest part might be in the initial fire attack, might only be in the initial stages of the fire. And that standards are designed to protect you at that time. But this incident's a little bit different. A little more activity going on inside the building. You might have been in a situation and you know what's going on up there. As you're advancing the line, you're doing overhaul, you're doing a secondary search, you're looking for things and wanting to be sure that everything's okay. The line is laid, the chief is in a position out front, everything seems to be under control. The apparatus is staged correctly. The public is being held back at this point. We've got some additional resources. I don't know what the staffing on the companies were, but it looked like it was either a 2 or a 3-person engine company when they arrived. We're going to put some more folks in there. If there was a thermal imager being used, that would have been, it could have been built to comply with NFPA 1802. But I'll share with you that right now there are manufacturers who are producing non-compliant products and are marketing them and saying they comply to sections of the standard. But that's a marketing ploy because the product does not comply with the entire standard. And you got to ask yourself, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is when you're working in this environment or worse, do you want a piece of equipment that met part of the standard, or do you want a piece of equipment that met the entire standard? So if you're involved in specifying or purchasing thermal imagers, be sure you're looking for product compliant with 1802, certified, right there. 8 minutes into the incident, they found a 4-year-old kid. That's where the turnout gear worked. Protected the responders and gave them the ability to do their operations and now to hot-foot it down to the ambulance to get that little person to the hospital. The good news is the young girl survived and was recognized at a city council meeting, as well as the firefighter and the firefighter medic that brought her out, performed CPR, and successfully resuscitated her. That's NFPA standards at work each and every day on your fire ground, in your firehouses, protecting yourself and your members. How does this happen? We don't develop the standards. Volunteers like Rick develop the standards, and Russ Sanders is going to talk to you about our field operations and how they can be a resource to you as well.
Thanks, Ken. My name is Russ Sanders, and I'm the NFPA Regional Director. I'm also the Executive Secretary for the Metro Fire Chiefs Association, which is the association that represents a large city and county fire chiefs throughout the country. As Ken said, he talked about the documents that we publish and how they're used. I'm going to talk a little more about how they're developed and how they're adopted. As you can see up here, our job, my job and my colleagues, our job is to go out into the field and work with people, get them involved in the process, and get them involved not only in the process of developing the documents, but also getting them adopted through the different state, local, and even federal levels. But you notice up here key constituencies. The fire service is our key constituents. That's who we have to get involved. And I'm going to tell you a quick story because I got a feeling many of you are probably thinking the same way that I thought. Back in, I should mention, I spent 29 years in the Louisville Fire Department. I went through the ranks there. I spent my final 9 years as chief of the department there. My final couple of years as chief, I got appointed to a board called NIBS, National Institute of Building Sciences. Does anybody here familiar with that board? Anyway, it's a board that I believe 7 of the members are appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by Congress, and the other 7 are elected. I was one of the elected members. Well, I got on this board, and I found out very quickly that I was only the second fire chief to be on the board. And this board has been around, it's still around. It's located in Washington, D.C., and it's still very active in developing policies, procedures, and codes, not codes and standards, but regulations that regulate and drive the built environment. Anyway, after going to a couple of meetings and getting to know the other members, I went to the president and I said, you know, it seems odd to me I'm the only fire service person on this board, because it had everything to do with the built environment, like Ken said, where you work. And he looked at me and said, what are you talking about? He said, we have all kinds of fire service people on the board. I said, really? I've met all of them. Who are they? So he points over and says, well, Joe here, he's a fire protection engineer. And Bill here, he's a building official. I said, that's not fire service. I'm talking about people crawling down hallways with fire rolling over their head. We only had, in the history of this board, I was the only second person to be a fire suppression or a firefighter on that board. And I'll tell you what I learned from that. A couple of things. One is we got to get more involved, because I made a presentation to the board and said exactly that. Where is the fire service? In my mind, the fire service means firefighters. In their mind, it means fire protection engineers and design professionals. So the thing that was very pleasing about this, when I made the presentation, I found almost every person involved agreed with me and said we would love to have the fire service involved. We would love to have firefighters here get their input. I was talking to Rick before you came in today about a fire, the Cook County Fire building in Chicago. Anybody familiar with that fire? Anybody here from Chicago? Okay. The vestibule where the standpipe system is, are you familiar with that? No firefighter ever had any input into that, did they? It's stupid. When you look at it from a firefighting perspective, it's idiotic. You've got to now breach the fire floor and the fire door. I went out and investigated that fire after the event, obviously, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I said, this is a perfect classic example of the firefighting force, the fire service in my mind, not being involved in the process. So we've got to get involved, and that's a little more about what I want to talk about here. Health and safety standards, you're all familiar with 1500, 1710, but there's what, 220, Ken, something like that number for the built environment?
Yes.
About 220 of our approximately 300 documents deal with the built environment. Again, your workplace. You've got to get involved. Now I have up here, IAFF has taken a leading role in data-driven. I've got to tell you something. No organization in this country has made the commitment that the IAFF has in terms of getting scientific data into the codes and standards. I've been working for the last 6 or 7 years primarily with Lori Moore, and I got to tell you, and I've said this many times, Nobody in our profession, nobody, works harder or smarter than Lori Moore. Because of the work that she has been doing, you're going to hear about it tomorrow on the high-rise. I was a technical advisor on the high-rise and low-rise NIST projects that you're going to hear about tomorrow. She is changing the face of the codes and standards in terms of science-driven. You heard President Shakeberger talk about it this morning. Science-driven. You know what, a lot of our detractors, when we go out in the different groups that are more concerned about making a couple of dollars than fire and life safety, a lot of those people say, the NFPA codes and standards, just a bunch of fire guys sitting around making stuff up. Well, obviously they don't understand the process at all. It's an ANSI certified process, accredited process. There's very strict rules about who can participate, balance, interest groups, and so on and so forth. But now, when we go back, and we're getting ready, 1710's in cycle right now, and it was waiting for us to finish this high-rise project. I want to give you a couple of examples of some of the things we learned through this project that involved nearly 6,000 firefighters over about 2.5 years. Anybody in here know what fractional effective dose is? Anybody know that term? Well, it's a term, fractional effective dose, or FED, is a term that determines when a person can survivability in the atmosphere. So an FED of 0.3, for example, means that about 11% of the population would survive in that environment. And those 11% that's people with immune system problems, sick, elderly, children, those people are high risk. They were the only ones that wouldn't survive a 0.3 FED. An FED of 1 means 50% of the population would not survive in that. And of course, then an FED of 3.0, just very few people would survive. Only the fittest of the fit would survive in a 3.0 FED atmosphere. Well, through these studies that we did, both the low-rise and high-rise, I want to give you a couple of things we learned. Now, everybody in here knows, and it's common sense to us that a 4-person crew is more effective than a 3-person crew, and a 4-minute response time is better than a 5-minute response time. Even though we all know that, and it seems like common sense, you've got to have science to back it up. You've got to be able to prove it. So we spent the last 7 years doing this. What we found on the low-rise, a 4-person crew, when they entered the building and attacked the fire, had an FED of 0.11, well under the 3, so everybody's basically surviving, and a 1 megawatt fire, 1.5 megawatt fire. A 1 megawatt fire is about like a sofa on fire. I should have mentioned also with the shorter response times. With the longer response time in a 2-person crew, they were dealing with an FED of 1.37, well over already what 50% of the population cannot survive in a fire of 2.1 megawatts. Now, this is science that proves that a 4-person crew is more effective than a 2-person crew or a 3-person crew. Obviously, due to time, I'm only using a couple of very brief examples. But this is now proven scientifically through the National Institute of Standards and Technology, our federal government's research on. On the high-rise one that we just finished, here's one of the things that now the 1710 Technical Committee will be hearing when they're discussing this standard. For both 3- and 4-person crews on a high-rise, and as you know, the standard recommends higher staffing on high-rise, a significant area on the fire floor is above 1.0. So already when you're responding to a high-rise fire with 3- and 4-person crews, you're already in a situation where more than 50% or right at 50% of the population is not going to survive it. With the 5- and 6-person crews we did, they encountered levels of above 0.3, but in no regions on the entire fire floor did they encounter levels above 1.0. So this is science that anybody can understand, and it proves scientifically that it does make a difference, staffing and response time. And also, we also looked at, and you're going to hear a lot more about this tomorrow, but we looked at does it matter if you have 2- or 3-person companies and just send more companies? It's still not as effective, not even close to being as effective as the 5- and 6-person companies were on these runs, and 4-person companies as well. But I do want to reiterate that. And the thing I want to say, I know President Shakeberger has recently appointed a number of new people to the technical committees. As I said, nobody in our industry has done more to improve the standards that you depend on than the IAFF leadership. But they can't do it alone. They cannot do it alone. You must be a participant. You must be involved. If you're on a technical committee, you've got to be an active participant. If you're not, you've got to show up at hearings, state and local hearings, and testify, because there's a whole lot of other people that don't have your best interest at heart that are there testifying. Just a quick look at the process. I certainly don't have time to go into this. It's about an hour program just explaining the process. It's not complicated, but like anything, when the first time you see it, and if you're not familiar with it, it's difficult. But there's 4 steps of the process. As you can see, public input. Anybody with an interest in an NFPA code or standard, anybody, except, in fact, in this room, there's 4 of us, I believe, that cannot participate in the process because we're staff. If you're not on NFPA staff, you can participate in the process. Your mother can, your grandmother can, your kids can. Anybody with an interest in fire and life safety can participate in the process, can submit public input, and there's no cost. And you don't have to be an NFPA member to do it as well. And you don't have to be an NFPA member to serve on a technical committee. So there's absolutely no reason for you not to participate in the process. You can do it online, you can fax it in, you can mail it in, mail in your proposal. Every standard that we publish has I'm sorry, I'm still calling it proposals. We just changed it to public input. It used to be proposals, but everybody in this room has the right, and once you submit public input, the process starts. You'll see a first draft. You'll see what action was taken by the technical committee. Then you have an opportunity to submit public comments. When you submit a public comment, the committee has to act. They either have to accept it, reject it, or accept it in part, and they have to explain why. You're going to see all this. Then you can go to the floor at our annual meeting. You can get up and make your case. You have to submit a NITNAM, or a notice of intent to make a motion. Once you do that, it's a certified motion, you can discuss it on the floor. And then if you're still not happy, you can appeal before the Standards Council. So it's an open, transparent process. It's about a 2-year process from the time it starts to the time it ends. But the key is the documents are only as good as the input we receive. I'll give you an example recently. Everywhere I go in the country, and I cover several countries as well as states throughout the U.S., all I've been hearing lately for the last year is, just like we heard at the opening today, active shooter. And we're very involved at the Metro and Urban Fire Forum. Again, you heard President Shapeberger talk about that this morning. We're going to soon have, at the end of this month, we'll have a policy that's endorsed by the Urban Fire Forum, I hope, and Metro chiefs, and it'll be sent out to everyone. But everywhere I go, I hear about active shooter. I was in Missouri just a couple of weeks ago, and this, of course, what we're hearing this morning is an operational perspective on active shooter. There's also the issue of codes. How do you deal with the codes? You can't lock doors. You can't bolt doors in schools and things like that. There are fire codes that dictate what can be done, how it can be locked, how many actions it must take to open a door, those types of things. But there's a big conflict right now. The schools want to lock the schools down. We want to get people out. They want to keep people from getting in. So there's a lot of issues going on right now. A lot of people are talking about defend-in-place tactics like we have in prisons, like we have in hospitals. But the interesting thing about this, everywhere I went, I was hearing about this. So I went back to our technical staff and engineering staff and said, hey, you know, this is a big deal. We got to start doing something about this. And they go, really? Not one person had submitted a public input or a comment, not one, on any of these issues to address this problem. So they tell me, we don't think it's a problem. We don't see anybody submitting input. We don't see anybody commenting on this. So that's an example. The documents that Ken talked about and the ones that I've just mentioned, the 220 plus for the built environment, are only as good as the input we get. And that's up to you. You've got to contribute that. You know 1710, I just mentioned, it's back in cycle. It skipped the cycle because it was waiting for the high-rise report that we were working on, that I was working on with your leadership, the IFF. That's now available. The technical committee does have that. So the 1710 committee right now is looking at going beyond the 2,000 square foot single family detached dwelling to look at garden apartments, strip malls, and high-rise. So this is going to be a very, very active time for the 1710 technical committee. So you're going to want to monitor that. 1730. 1730, does anybody in here know what 1730 is? Well, the way I like to describe it, and since we're being recorded, I probably shouldn't do this, but 1730 is a 1710 for fire prevention bureaus in terms of plan review, public education, fire investigations, those type things. I was finding as I was going out throughout the country, especially as I said, I work primarily with the major departments, the largest departments. They were having some real success with 1710, supported by the low-rise NIST study that I talked about earlier, the staffing and deployment study. They were having some success. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't any layoffs, there weren't any staff reductions, there were. But the chiefs who were using this, and I was literally getting phone calls daily from major city fire chiefs saying, can you guys help? And that's what we were sending, and it was doing some good. But you know what we're having? They're cutting fire prevention bureaus back big time. I mean, they were saying, there's nothing. Why do you have to have, how many of you guys have in the Fire Prevention Bureau now?
Probably 10, less than 10.
10 in the Fire Prevention Bureau in Louisville, Kentucky. City of Louisville's got a population of, I don't know, 500 plus thousand people in that range. 10 people. There's nothing out there that says you need 8 plan review people, 10 investigators, 10 public educators. There's nothing out there that provides any guidance on what a properly staffed fire prevention bureau is. So 1730 is going to certainly help in that regard. The bottom line is, don't sit on the sidelines. If you do, you know, you're going to get what other people think you should be getting. And like I say, you go back to that Cook County building. Obviously, there was no fire service involvement in that. If I had the time, I wish I had a diagram of it if you could see, but basically what they did was they had a stairwell that was intended to be an attack stairwell. Now this sounds insanity for anyone who's ever fought a fire, but then they have you open that door, you go into a little vestibule area where there's a hose cabinet, standpipe cabinet, with 150 feet of hose in it, and it's about the size of half of this, up here it's about the size of about 4 telephone booths. And the idea was to open the door on the fire floor and attack the fire without breaching the stairwell and having smoke go out the stairwell. Now, how are you going to flake 2 feet of hose, much less 150 feet out in a phone booth? It ain't happening. So, of course, what the firefighters had to do is open the door, breach the stairwell, lay the hose line down the stairwell. Now, the hose line's being crimped by the door. They're trying to drag it through the door. It's unbelievable. The intent was great. And the design professionals were thinking, isn't this a great idea? We'll design this way, and then if they have a fire, they won't get smoke in the stairwell. But if they'd had a rookie firefighter on his first day in the class, he'd known better than that. So that's the reason you need to get involved. As I said, we have 225 technical committees right now. We have 6,500 volunteers. All of everybody on those technical committees are volunteering their time, their expertise, developing some 300 codes and standards. Then it results in a completely open, transparent process, democratic process where everyone has a right. Basically what it takes to get a document through what we call consensus is 2/3. 2/3 of that technical committee. A typical technical committee would have 30 people in it. So you've got to get 20. And those 20 are from all walks of life. You can't have more than 1/3 from any discipline. So you have to gain consensus. In many cases, it's painful to do that. But at the end of the day, you've got an excellent document when people get involved. And I want to turn it back over now to Ken.
Thank you, Russ. And we talked a little bit and showed some video about standards in action, but as a takeaway before Rick Swan talks with you, I'd like to leave you with some simple points that if you're not already doing, when you go back to work, you can start doing for your own safety, for your crew's safety, and using NFPA standards. At the start of each tour, perform an inspection of your SCBA. That's particularly important because of the face mask deformity issue that's been happening. And the SCBA standard is about to be released, and it has been revised to provide new testing criteria to address the face piece deformity. So the 2013 compliant SCBA will not have that issue. But it's important you inspect your SCBA at the start of each tour. That's from NFPA 1852. Have an annual physical. General McCaffrey made the mention about being a soldier and being in the infantry was a young man's job. And as you got older, it was harder and harder. Our reports show that if you're 60 years old or older, you have a 4 times higher risk of suffering a fatal cardiac event during fireground activities. What's your defense? Your defense is an annual physical. And during firefighting operations, perform a risk analysis. Risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little is one way to say it, but that's the responsibility of the individual firefighter as well as the company officer and to provide that analysis through the chain back to the fire ground commander so that they can use you as their eyes inside the building and make a good risk analysis so that no member is exposed to an undue risk without benefit. 3 simple things from NFPA standards that can help you as soon as you get back. At this time, I'd like to introduce Rick Swan. Rick?
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Rick Swan. I want to try to put a little bit of a personal face to this as to the fire service. I retired the fire service in November. I was a deputy chief when I retired. I started out as a tailboard firefighter. I worked for CAL FIRE in Central California and in the Fresno area, and moved around the state. I ended up in San Luis Obispo County. Anybody from California? Don't ever go there. We don't want you there. It's a beautiful place, honest to God. You should come and see it. Anyway, in 2001, I was asked by our president of our local 2881 if I wanted to sit on a standard. And that standard at the time was 1977, the Wildland Safety Clothing Committee, the technical committee that writes all the technical aspects of that. Sure, it sounds pretty interesting. I'm not a technical person. I ride on a fire engine. That's all I do. At the time, I was flying in an airplane in an air attack show. I don't know any one thing about technical aspects of this stuff. But I thought, you know what, I have experience, I have ideas, maybe I can provide some input. The first meeting I ever went to, I'm listening to these folks, and there's manufacturers, there are experts in testing, subject matter experts, all these folks in there. There were a couple of people from fire departments representing fire departments, a couple of people representing large folks like the U.S. Forest Service in this committee and GSA, the folks that buy these things. Well, their interests were a little bit different because some of their costs. They're looking at the importance of cost on how much is this widget going to cost if I have to put it on, and what's it going to do? There's no really, they're all interested in firefighter safety, but they don't have the experience. They're not the ones that are sitting there, like Ken said, dragging their ass through the floor on in the smoke. They're not in there, and we are. So I was able to start the process of just implementing or adding the firefighter's aspect to this. Just the simple fact that I'm there, I am now being able to provide, and they turn. So they start talking about some concept, and they go, so what do you think about that? What do you think they're going to do with that? And well, here's what's going to happen. The input comes in. These meetings are open. You don't have to be a committee member to go to these committees. They're open. They're available for everybody to come into. So through that process and that understanding, and I went through one cycle. Our cycle is a 5-year cycle, and you get to go all over the place. It's kind of neat if you're supported by the union that I'm supporting. The IFF is who I represent. They send me around. And so it's kind of fun to go around to different cities and stuff. But you meet the people that are making our protective clothing. You get to talk to the folks. If you're in the respiratory protection group, you get to talk to the folks that are making the breathing apparatus, the ones that are making the face shields, and you get to have that direct input. In the 1977, in the structure gear, if you have an issue with gloves, there was some issue with gloves a while back, you have direct input and access to those folks. You can sit there and talk to those folks. These are the representatives for every one of these little subject matters that are there, that are in each one of these committees. So a few years after I was on, I went through the first cycle, it came up that the chair of the committee resigned. They moved on. And I was asked to chair the committee. No, I take that back. I wasn't asked. I was said you were going to chair the committee. And holy cow, I don't know what to do. Yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly, last man standing in this case. It's a little bit overwhelming at parts, but company officer, you get firefighters and you get somebody, a ruling firefighter or something, and you got to sit them down. It's no different than that. You're chairing a committee. You've got people there that are trying to do the same things that you're trying to do. You're all going for the same goal. You're just you have different ways maybe of getting there. So we went through this process. My point to this is that it's not that difficult. If you have an idea, you may not have the technical expertise on to get it from point A to point B, but you have people there that are wanting that knowledge. They want that information. They'll give you something to say, I want you to try this out because I don't know how this is going to work. Here, this is something new. Try this. What about this idea? These things are very important to them because ultimately they want to build a product that what? We will buy. And we're not going to buy crap. I mean, we are the MacGyvers of this world. Am I not right? LCES, in the world of wildland firefighting, LCES, lookouts, communications, escape route, safety zones. That just beat into our heads over and over again. Well, in the fire service, when you're talking about this, LCESs look cool every second. And that's, you know, we have this, we have the little toy, we have the stuff. We have that stuff because we find that it works for us. And when it works for us, somebody else sees it and says, hey, that's a great idea. I'm going to have it. Well, these manufacturers see these things. And if it's going to be put onto ourselves and it's going to be attached to us as part of our personal protective equipment, then it's got to pass these standards. We want it there, but it's got to be able to not hurt us. When I first got on the 1977 committee, it's called load carrying equipment, but we call it web gear. It's just the stuff you put your water on, your fire shelter, you have stuff on your back. If you're on a hand crew, you're going to take this thing out and you're going to be with it for 4 or 5 days, whatever. But there was no standard. You could have anything you wanted. And some of the stuff they had was basically shrink wrap material. It got within 120 degrees of something, and it basically was shrink wrap. There was no standard to that. And it's like, well, that's kind of odd. You know, we work really hard. If we're going to put a helmet on, we don't want the goggle degrading the helmet when something happens. So why don't we put something on our back that's carrying something very important for us, our fire shelter and our water, and we're not going to have any standard to that. That's touching us. That's part of our personal protective equipment. So we were able to work through that using manufacturers, using the expertise from the Forest Service and from some other folks, and we were able to walk that through, and it's now part of the standard. These are the things these things happen. What about the and I'm going to probably butcher the name of this, but the drag device. DR, thank you. That came about not because the manufacturers wanted it. That came about because we wanted it. That's how this stuff went. Now it's standard. Now you have to have it. Those are the processes. Those are the things that you see. This is not it's not difficult. You can take this as far as you want. You can make it as much as you want. And you can get as much as technically involved as you want. Gentleman in the back, I don't remember your name, from Houston. He is extremely involved in the 1977 process because, 1971, excuse me, in the structure guild, because they have a passion and they have an interest in this. And they are the fire service voice on that, part of the fire service voice on that committee. And because of that voice, we are getting interest. We get the ear of the manufacturers. And those are the pieces. Those are those things you cannot disregard because they are building them to those standards. They're not going to build them below that, and they're not going to take something out that's in the standard. They're going to build them to that standard. So one of the things that we have a problem with is that these committees, these technical committees, especially the ones that focus around for us, we are around the state, the United States, in our committees. One of the things that I have failed as a committee chair is that we pick a site. It's convenient for most folks because honestly, it's expensive to travel. And it's expensive for hotels, and I run up a 3-day or 4-day meeting because of travel on either ends, especially if I go coast to coast. I run up a $1,200, $1,500 bill with airfare and hotels and stuff. I mean, people don't have that kind of money. And it's thank God for us in the IFF and our participation in this process that we're able to have some participants in there. And not just me, but just the one committee, but we have them all over in all the committees. But what we failed to do is that we have failed to notify those locals of the cities that we are in. We were just in Nashville not too long ago. And we're thinking, gosh, probably should have called somebody from Nashville. They may want to come in and sit on this. It may be interesting to them. These are open meetings, remember? Now, for my committee, maybe Nashville, if I was there and it was Wildland Committee, maybe somebody doesn't have that much of interest in it. But if I was here in Colorado Springs, maybe, or here Denver, or any place in California or on the West Coast, maybe down in Florida, maybe there's somebody there that might have an idea, hey, I want to come to this meeting. So we're in the process right now of making sure that the locals in and around those communities that we're going to have our meetings, not just mine, but in all of them, they're going to get an invitation. We're going to work with the Secretary Treasurer's Office to get the addresses of all the locals and the presidents, make sure that the NFPA has that information, and so that as we create these meetings, we are going to go around and we're going to try to ensure that the invitation is out there. And we hope that your local will stand and provide this information out, because honestly, there are committees all over the place. There was, and I think Dave can attest to some of these stuff, these committee liaisons. There'll be 2 days, they'll have a meeting from one committee in, say, San Antonio, Texas on Monday, Tuesday. They have another meeting on Wednesday, Thursday, and then the following in San Antonio. And then they'll try another one sometimes, or a back-to-back something in San Antonio also. So, I mean, these are just examples. We come all this. Yes, sir? Yeah. My preference, the committee liaison asked me, he goes, Rick, we're going to have a meeting in my committee. We're going to have a meeting the beginning of next year. Where do you want to go? Well, it's winter. Missoula's out. No offense. But we're going to go San Diego. So, I mean, that's what drives that, honestly. I mean, there's some pieces to it. I mean, there are contracts that the NFPA has to work out. There are other aspects of these things, but that's really the process. There's really nothing out there. Do you have an idea?
I was just thinking, I mean, if you knew one that's going to affect high rises, like since being a large metropolitan area, look at the Wyoming River Basin, some area, California, or some of the
You got it.
close to the rurals that you're going to have firefighters you don't want this big is going to affect them. They're going to have
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's when the firefighter stuff, but you remember, firefighters typically on my committee, Jeff just got Jim, excuse me, Joel. See, he just got appointed. You know, I apologize. Come on. He just got appointed as the alternate for me on the 1977, and so you can. It's expensive. Okay, it's expensive. And these manufacturers are doing the same. They have the same expenses that we do in getting these places. So we try to make it a little bit fair. If we have one on the West Coast, we'll have one on the East Coast. We try to have them in the middle, you know, so that everybody goes every place. So unfortunately, it's been more and more. So am I getting the hook? You give me the hook, you know. It's like, turn your back on me. So, but that's a great question. And, we have 10 situations that shout watch out in the wildland. This is the 11th situation that shout watch out right here. But that's exactly what happens, is that we want to have that invitation out for everybody. We want you to know where we're at. We want you to know what's going on and provide that information so you can come and sit and listen, raise your hand, ask questions. It's an open forum. There's a process. Obviously, it's a meeting. It's run by the rule of order and those sort of things, but it's there for us. And if we don't participate, and if we're not putting our voices into this, then we're silent. And we're going to get what we're going to get. So it's up to us to participate. So with that, we're going to open this up now to questions on any of the aspects of the NFPA and how it affects us and what we do in the day-to-day aspects, and how you might want to become involved if you want to. So any questions?
Just a quick comment, too. I meant to mention Sean DeCrane chaired a committee with the IFF, I served on that as well, to explain this process in fire suppression, firefighter terms. That's going to be available. Hopefully, I talked to Sean. He's here, so he's got a class, I think, tomorrow, so he'll probably talk about it. But there should be something released by the IFF, hopefully in the next couple of days, or certainly not longer than a week or so, that'll help you with this process as well. The only other comment I wanted to make is we got very specific directions from Lori Moore that we will be out of this room on the half hour, because another group's coming in. So if we get a lot of questions, we'll move it out in the hall. But please, any questions that you have.
I I'm confused. I realize that NFPA are standards. They're not laws, right? Or,
Until they're adopted.
okay. Well, I'm in Memphis, a large metropolitan fire department, and they're cutting equipment back. And they're starting with truck companies, which leaves our downtown area during the day at any given time could be between 500,000 and 1 million people that work in our high-rise buildings. We have 2 trucks. But both of those also cover the south side of the inner city and the north side of the inner city. And that's where they're gonna make most of their calls. And when they're out, the closest one that's east, if they were already ready sitting on the apparatus, it's a 10-minute drive. What do we do?
Well, I don't know the exact answer to your question. I can only give you a real brief piece of this and what's the history that's coming forward and what's going on in California, briefly on some of the wildland stuff and our PPE. But we have an opinion from our department's attorney and other attorneys that while California is not an NFPA state when it comes to our PPE necessarily, it is a recognized standard. And I dare any lawyer to stand up and say that it's not been fully attested to and worked through. And in any court of law, they're going to say, well, just because you have this policy that's not been analyzed and stuff, that any attorney is going to allow that stuff to exist. So the standards are important because they are a consensus standard and it's recognized. And so liability-wise, your city's hanging their butt out. Because that's what we figured, and I mean, sooner or later, it's pay me now, pay me later. You know that absolutely. So, but beyond that, and that's my opinion. That's not NFPA opinion.
Well, no, it's exactly right. The NFPA opinion is NFPA publishes the documents. Several of those documents, well over 100 of those documents, are adopted into law. Now, if 1710 was adopted into law, they'd have to follow it. I know in Louisville, you got a lot of that in the contract. Through contract negotiations, it's specific as to how the staffing on companies, different companies, and so forth. So the way to deal with that would obviously be to have it in your labor contract or adopted in the law. Now, I don't know of any community that's adopted 1710 in the law. But there's, of the NFPA, there are?
No, but OSHA's another area that can come in and hold you accountable for that. And those states that are bound by OSHA, like Cal OSHA, that's another angle for them to take hold of that standard.
Right, and
OSHA can come in and grab it.
International Fire Codes, you know, like, it addresses or it refers to the NFPA standards on a lot of these issues. And that's, in the International Fire Codes are usually adopted in ordinance for the fire department to use, so.
well, that's what I was talking about, actually. He's talking about the fire code is adopted, and it references a lot of other NFPA standards. But those other NFPA standards that are referenced in both the International Fire Code and NFPA 1, the NFPA Fire Code, those are typically adopted either standalone or through the building code, a number of other ways. But the 1710 is not. That's not referenced in any of the fire codes. So if you do adopt the fire code, in not every state actually, but most states do have a fire code. They do adopt it. It is adopted into law, either at the state level or at the local level through an ordinance. And then that is law, like any other law. People have to follow that. So, for example, in Missouri, I was talking about being in Missouri the other day. They don't have a fire code in Missouri. And I was sitting there listening to the school board people say, well, we've installed key double bolt locks on all of our doors and all that. And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? Because they don't have a fire code adopted. So they can do whatever they want. But you're right. Those reference documents do become part of the code. They do become part of the law. But 1710 is not referenced in any fire code. So I don't know of any local jurisdiction or state that adopts 1710 in the law. But Rick made an excellent point. It is an industry nationally recognized consensus document that's been through the process. And I wouldn't want to be the fire chief on the stand when they're saying, were you aware of 1710? Yes. Do you know what it says? Yes. Well, how come you're not meeting it? Well, because my political leadership won't allow me to meet it. It's the truth. That's exactly what's going on. Of course, you know the fire chief wants to meet it. The fire department wants to meet it. But political, at the end of the day, it's political. It's just exactly what your general president was saying today up there. You've got to get in the political process as well because that's who's making the final decisions. But if it's law, obviously, then they have to follow it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We have one just on that same subject as far as, how many states are not NFPA states?
The question is, how many states are not NFPA states? Well, every state in the United States adopts numerous NFPA codes and standards. There's not an exception to that, every single state. Now, when you say what's an NFPA state, that depends on how you define it. We define an NFPA state as a state that uses our fire code, and there are 19 of those. But every single state in the United States and in many other countries use, in most cases, well over 100 NFPA codes and standards.
Does that go for Canada as well?
Yes, the question is, does it go for Canada as well? And yes, it does. Yes, Canada does have its own building code and fire code, but a number of your provinces do use NFPA 101.1 and several other documents as well.
I just want to make the comment about the OSHA states and the OSHA regulations. Every state is bound by OSHA, if they believe it or not. There's some states that think that we're not an OSHA state, so we don't have to go by things. No, they have to have laws that are equal to or greater than what the OSHA standards are. So every state is affected by OSHA. That's a misconception by a lot of attorneys I know too. So.
Well, we've got time for one more question because Lori says, get out of here, and I'm not getting on her bad side.
Rick shaking his head. He knew I just had to have the last go. One of the strategies we're going to adopt in Australia from the union perspective is that wherever we've got individual departments that have current issues, long-standing and outdated gear, we're going to try and take the meetings to those venues. It's got a couple of aspects about it. In most standards bodies that I serve on, not just in my country, these meetings are dominated by people that make the stuff, test the stuff, and buy the stuff. And you heard earlier, and it's so true across the world, that the end user is a very lone voice. So if I can reiterate anything, be involved and you will get what you want. It might not be tomorrow, but eventually you'll have success.
Now, on behalf of Ken and Rick, I just want to say thank you for being here. It's very impressive to come in here and see a room full of people with an interest in codes and standards. So thank you very much.
Thank you.